Hi everyone. I hope you can all hear me. It's 1 o'clock, so I thought we should make a start. Probably waiting for a few more, but I'll make a start anyway. So thank you for coming. My name's Jo Richardson and I'm Associate Director here at Right Vigar. I'm here with my colleague Ollie, and we're obviously here to discuss the VAT domestic reverse charge, which affects a lot of building and construction businesses. Before we start, just a bit of housekeeping. You'll see, hopefully, that you're all on mute. There is a reason for that. It's just for sound quality purposes so that you can hear myself and Ollie. This webinar is in a question and answer format, so hopefully it'll be easier that way for you all to understand the subject. But at the end, you do get a chance to ask any questions that are more relevant to you. So if you can please, throughout the webinar, just comment in the chat. We'll read some of the questions out, and it may be at that point in the end we ask you to come off mute just so we can ask you a further question or to make sure that you've understood what we've said. If any of those questions are really specific, we may come back to you after this webinar. And the webinar will be available afterwards for you all. So yeah, you can come back and watch again in your free time. Right, back to the VAT domestic reverse charge then. The implementation date for this was the 1st of March. Initially, as I'm sure most of you will know, the date was October 29, but this was postponed because of Brexit. There have been quite a few attempts by bodies such as the Federation of Master Builders and others to stop this, mainly because of the additional admin burden, but also for some businesses there's going to be some cash flow issues. So this was challenged, especially at this time with other things such as Brexit and such as the pandemic. There's just something extra to think about. The government obviously rejected all of these attempts, so here we are. Why bring it in anyway? Well, as you can imagine, it's an anti-fraud measure. But basically, this change has been made to reduce what they call missing trader fraud, which they estimate, the government estimates, is worth over 100 million each year. So this type of fraud occurs when criminal businesses that often work together obtain separate VAT numbers in order to pass goods or services down the supply chain. Eventually, one of the traders in the chain goes missing after receiving some output VAT from one of its customers, but before, as you can imagine, paying it over to HMRC. The construction sector is particularly at risk because you can have labour-only businesses that charge VAT despite having relatively little costs. And the amounts charged to their customers can be quite significant. So by placing the liability to account for VAT with the customer, it means that the supplier does not charge or receive an amount in lieu of VAT, removing the risk of cash not being sent over or given to HMRC. So that's the reason why. We've given it a little time since the 1st of March just to see how it's settled in, how the implementation's been for our clients, but we're still getting quite a lot of questions, hence the need for this webinar, and I hope this will answer most of your common questions. But as I say, there's a chance for you to ask some more at the end. Ollie, did you want to introduce yourself before we start?
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ollie and I'm based at the Sleaford office. And yeah, as Jo said, hopefully this what will be your day-to-day queries. It might be that you're coming up to your first VAT return that includes some of these transactions. So hopefully it'll just give some pointers and get you in a position where you're happy with what you're going to get submitted this quarter.
Okay, we will make a start then. So firstly, how do I decide whether to use the reverse charge?
Okay, so hopefully you can all see the slides. And the slide on screen at the moment is a decision tree, and that's been provided by HMRC. It's a really good place to start when you're looking at each of your transactions individually. First thing to do is just to decide if the supply is within the scope of CIS. This is the main thing, because if it's not, then the reverse charge will not apply. The supply must either be standard or reduced rated. So that means that ordinarily it would have been either 20% or 5% VAT. You must then confirm that your customer is VAT registered and that the payment will be reported under CIS. And the final point is just to confirm that your customer is an end user. So only when all of those points are met and the customer confirms that they are not an end user will the domestic reverse charge apply. HMRC have stated that if there's any doubts over the correct VAT treatment, then provided that the recipient is VAT registered and the payment is subject to CIS, then you should use the reverse charge.
Okay, you mentioned end users there. What if I'm not sure whether my customer is an end user? What should I do? Okay,
so in that situation, the onus is actually on the customer to notify you that they qualify to be treated as an end user. So you can ask them to provide a written statement, something along the lines of that they're an end user or an intermediary supplier for the purposes of Section 55A of the VAT Act, and that they should then issue them with a normal VAT invoice with VAT charged at the appropriate rate. They should make it clear that they will not account for the reverse charge.
Okay, but what do we do if they don't or won't provide this statement?
If you're supplying a service that's within the scope of CIS and your customer is VAT and CIS registered, then you're entitled to assume that the VAT reverse charge applies.
Okay. You also mentioned intermediary supplier. My customer says they are an intermediary supplier and I don't need to operate the reverse charge. What does this mean?
Yeah, so this is probably something that won't come up ever so often, but an intermediary supplier, it's a business that's registered for VAT and CIS and that they're linked or connected to what is the end user. So they'll either have a relevant interest in the same piece of land where the construction work's taking place, or they're part of the same corporation tax group. Again, you just ask them to supply you with that written statement to confirm that their status is as they say.
Okay, and again, if they don't provide a statement, is that the same as you explained for end users?
It is, yeah. So you're entitled to assume that the reverse charge applies.
Brilliant. Okay. How do I find out if my customer is registered for CIS and VAT?
So if you're working with a new customer, you'd ask them for the CIS registration number or a copy of their registration certificate. It's important that you keep that with your VAT records. There is an online VAT number checker where when you get hold of the number, you'll be able to put that in and it will confirm that it's valid and registered to the name and the address of that business.
Okay. We've had this question a few times. What rules do we follow if the work began before the reverse charge applies, but is completed after this date?
Yeah, so you might have come across some of these already, but the decision is based on when the tax point is of the transaction. So the tax point is created either when an invoice is raised or a payment is made, and it's whichever one of those is the earliest, that's when your tax point is. If the tax point is before the 1st of March, then your normal VAT rules apply. If the tax point is after the 1st of March, then the reverse charge will apply. The only time this will be slightly different is if any of you operate self-billing invoices. And in this situation, if the invoice is dated before the 1st of March, the invoice must be paid before the 31st of May for those old rules still to apply. So if it's dated before 1st of March, but it's still outstanding after that point, then you'll do it on the reverse charge will apply. So you might have to reissue your invoice at that point.
Okay. What about cash accounting? So many of our clients use cash accounting. Is this a problem with reverse charge?
It is, yeah. So cash accounting can't actually be used by anything that's covered by the reverse charge, but it can be used for any other supplies. So it can still be used alongside. If your supplies are mostly covered by reverse charge, it might be better that you actually move on to normal VAT accounting, because you've actually recovered on your invoices when they're entered into the books, rather than waiting until the point that they're paid. If you find that under the reverse charge, it might be that you're regularly qualified for a repayment. And then in this situation, it might be that you're actually better off to go on to monthly VAT returns, as that'll speed up the repayment of input tax from HMRC.
Yeah, good point. So to recap then, if supplies are mostly covered by the reverse charge, we ought to change to standard accounting. Do we need to inform HMRC about this?
Yeah, so yeah, more than likely, you'd be better off on standard accounting through. But there's no requirement to inform HMRC that you're going to change across.
Okay. Let's move on now to invoicing. I've just completed some plastering work for Main Contractor Limited, which is overseeing the development of an office block. How should I invoice this?
So again, hopefully you can see on the screen the slide. So if your main contractor is CIS and VAT registered, you need to issue an invoice to them showing all of your normal information, but including some negatives such as reverse charge, customer to pay the VAT. So the amount of VAT that's going to be due under the reverse charge still needs to be included on the invoice. It doesn't need to be included in the amount shown as VAT charged. So you'll see on the invoice on the slide, the top part of it shows that you've got what the VAT amount would actually be, but the total due on the bottom half of the slide doesn't actually include that amount. If your business generates its invoices electronically and you're not able to show it in that way exactly, then you'll just have to put some wording on the invoice stating that the customer is required to calculate the standard rate of VAT due on the amount shown that's on the invoice. So just something along those words of customers to account to HMRC for the reverse charge output tax on the VAT exclusive price of the items marked reverse charge.
Okay, and still looking at invoicing, what should I do if a subcontractor issues us with an invoice that actually does show VAT?
Okay, so yeah, if they raise an invoice like that and you think it's wrong, then you make the point with the subcontractor at that point, just letting them know that you think that the supply falls under the reverse charge, and hopefully they'll issue that invoice showing this. It's important that you don't pay that invoice, including the VAT element, because that VAT has actually been wrongly charged to you, which means that you're not actually able to claim it back in the normal way.
Okay, and what about if this was the other way around? The contractor doesn't believe the work falls within the reverse charge.
So in this situation, you would just charge your VAT as normal. It's really important then that you keep a record of that conversation that you've had with the contractor. If it then turns out that the reverse charge should have been applied, it is actually the contractor that would be liable for that missing VAT. So in that situation, the risk would then be with the contractor if they're wrong. Okay.
Looking at new builds then, what is the position if the work relates to a new build?
Okay, so the actual VAT liability rules as to whether it's a standard rated or a zero rated supply have not changed. And as per the HMRC decision tree, the reverse charge will only actually apply when there is actual VAT to account for. So if there's no supply there, if it's zero rated, there's no requirement to use the reverse charge. Just be really careful with some supplies for new builds, because not always all the supplies are zero rated. Things like the higher scaffolding, that would fall under the reverse charge scheme.
Right, okay. The next question I think we've had a few times as well. What if I've done two pieces of work for the same customer, one where they were the end user and one where they were selling the work on as part of a larger supply of construction services?
If you're raising an invoice that's got both reverse charge and non-reverse charge work on there, the reverse charge will then apply to the whole of that invoice. There is just one slight point to make, small point to make, is that if the reverse charge element of that work is less than 5% of the total invoice, then you can apply the normal VAT rules to the whole of that invoice.
Okay. So if we now move on to the actual VAT return, what entries should I make on my VAT return for supplies that I've made under the reverse charge?
Okay, so again, hopefully you can see an example of this VAT return on the screen. So for any supplies that are liable to the reverse charge, you'll enter the net amount charged on the invoice into box 6, so the net amount of the sale. There'll be no amount that's going to be entered into box 1 for anything that's under the reverse charge. But just remember that anything on normal supplies will just continue to be entered into box 6 and 1, but anything that's under the reverse charge, you won't include anything in that box 1. Okay.
I have a UK registered business and have received an invoice relating to a domestic reverse charge supply. What VAT should I pay?
So this is where you'll need to self-account for the amount of the reverse charge VAT as shown on the invoice. If the invoice, it states that it's a reverse charge invoice, but it doesn't show that amount of VAT due, then it'll be down to you just to calculate what would have been the VAT rate, the VAT amount using that appropriate rate.
Okay. And how do I show the reverse charge VAT I need to pay on my next VAT return?
Okay, so just on this, the current slide that's on screen now, so the amount of VAT due will be included on box 1 of your VAT return in the period in which the supply was received. And normal tax point rules will apply for determining when the supply is made or received. The net amount should be included in box 7 on this VAT return, and no amount will be included in box 6 in respect to the reverse charge. So if you're entitled to recover all of that VAT, then and gain it back as input tax, then that same amount will need to be included into box 4 of that same VAT return. The example on screen will just show where we've got a sale raised to a main contractor for £2,000 plus VAT. So we have the £2,000 included in box 6, and then the VAT amount on that £400 is included in box 1. We've also got a purchase of £2,000, a purchase of £1,000 plus VAT included on this return. So again, the net amount in box 7, and this is where it's different. So the £200 will be included in both box 1 and box 4, where they would net each other off.
Okay, so we've covered a lot now. We've covered about invoicing and what we should be reporting. How do we get our software to do this? Can it all cope with it?
It can, yeah. So hopefully the majority of you will be using some sort of software, and it will make this easy in both completing your VAT return and generating the invoices correctly. The main software providers have all now introduced specific tax codes that will help you deal with this. Some of them do require that tax code and that part of the software is actually activated. So you just might want to make sure that you've ticked the right box to bring that through, the correct VAT codes coming through. Particularly, as I say, we might be coming up to the first VAT quarter that you've got to that includes some of these transactions. So it's really important that you just review that VAT return, make sure everything's in the boxes that you expect it to be. Yeah,
I think there are some free guides out there. I know Xero does one, so hopefully that will help. Hopefully other accounting software will have that similar type of thing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've run through all of our questions that we've already prepared. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope that all made sense.